Audio check test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Audio check test. 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As people are filling into the room, I will start given the secretary's schedule. My name is Jason Marzik. I'm the director of the Latin America Economic Growth Initiative here at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center, and I would first like to extend a special welcome to Secretary Kelly, to President Laura Chinchilla, to our three task force co-chairs present today, former Vice President Eduardo Stein, former Foreign Affairs Minister Maria Eugenia Brizuela, and Ambassador John Negroponte, and also to the many ambassadors joining us today and Atlantic Council board members. Feel free, if you want, to take out your phones to tweet about this event using the hashtag #CentralAmericaNow. It gives me great pleasure today to announce that after a year of intense deliberations, today marks the launch of the findings of our Northern Triangle Security and Economic Opportunity Task Force, which is now available on our website. This is a blueprint for how the U.S. and the countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras can work together to enact sweeping change. The three countries are at a crossroads. The region has seen 50,000 murders over the past 3 years, high-profile corruption scandals, and nearly 10% of the region's 30 million residents have left. But heightened U.S. investment, especially through the Plan of the Alliance for Prosperity, has been instrumental in pushing local leaders to enact change. Why should this be a concern for the U.S.? Well, left unchecked, the security, rule of law, and economic development challenges of the region will continue to push more unauthorized migrants north and will continue to make the region a prime transit area for illegal drugs en route to communities all across our country. And of course, being our closest neighbors, their fate and prosperity bears other repercussions for U.S. interests. What happens in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, impacts Americans in Abilene, Texas. That's the fact. And what we need is more assertive action. If we take more concrete, decisive actions now, the prospects can be bright. If we don't, it can get much worse. About a year ago, we formed this task force as part of an independent effort to put forward a long-term strategy for support and partnership with the region. This is not a group of Washington insiders trying to come up with the answers of what will propel catalytic change beyond our borders. The 4 co-chairs and 25 members represent the 3 countries, the United States, and broader Central America. Our work was informed by a 3-country poll conducted by Gallup so that we could be ensured our concerns really reflected the concerns of the people. And after Secretary Kelly's remarks, we will have a panel with our co-chairs and President Chia to look at some of the solutions of the task force. Now, one man who understands the importance of the Northern Triangle to the United States is Secretary of Homeland Security, John Kelly. Mr. Secretary, we are honored to have you here today. About a year ago, when I was first forming this task force, I recall reaching out to you to be our U.S. co-chair. And when you agreed to do so, I remember recalling how lucky we were to have a leader who understands so well the issues of Central America and the importance of tackling them holistically and collaboratively. And it's not just me that thinks this. Our task force co-chairs, members, and countless leaders across the region recognize you on a daily basis for your leadership in the region. Now, I'd like to note that Secretary Kelly had no role in the drafting of the report or the findings of the group, but Secretary, we are honored to have you at the beginning stages of this task force. Now, the Secretary requires no introduction, of course, but I would just list a few of his achievements. After spending 3 years deployed in Iraq, Secretary Kelly was promoted and confirmed by the U.S. Senate as Lieutenant General. He then served as a senior military assistant to Secretaries of Defense Robert Gates and Leon Panetta until promoted for a 4-star and given command of United States Southern Command, in which he commanded until January of 2017. He was then confirmed as Department of Homeland Security Secretary on January 20th, 2017. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. We look forward to your remarks, and if time permits, we will then sit down for a quick discussion afterwards. Please join me in welcome Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly.
Well, in the interest of time, and I have a really hard stop in about 25 minutes, honored to be here. In the 39 months that I was the head of the United States Southern Command, I learned a huge amount about Latin America in general and the difficulties, problems, challenges of Central America in particular. And because of the nature of the job there, and that is to say there was very little likelihood of any kind of a state-on-state war, but it was all about, as I looked at it, all about partnering with people to help them help us stem the flow of drugs, stem the flow of illegal migration movements, and everything in between. So I will just tell you that in this job, as hard as we worked in my last job to make a difference, and we did make a difference. I won't go into it right now, but the fact is that the Alliance for Prosperity, we had to, frankly, in order to get that accepted by the United States government, we had to outmaneuver the interagency because they weren't interested, even though the Alliance for Prosperity was those 3 countries getting together, regional approach, regional solutions, put their own money against it. There were many that were not interested in the Washington interagency because it was complicated, it was difficult. So we outmaneuvered them, we, Southcom. And without lobbying, of course, we could never do that, but by informing and educating the United States Congress and a number of members there, we got them very interested in the Alliance for Prosperity. And there was U.S. money put against it, but first and foremost, it was Central American money that created it. And the 3 presidents created the Alliance for Prosperity. And that's taken off very well. What we also attempted to do was to not only get after the drug flow, which is entirely due to the drug demand in the United States, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. The reason for the drug flow is because of our drug demand, and we do almost nothing about it. Yes, we try to rehabilitate drug addicts. Yes, we try to arrest our way out of this, but we do very little in our country, my country, the United States of America, to try to get at this incredible drug demand of the 3 hard drugs that is a direct result of what's happening in Central America. the breakdown of their societies, lack of police effectiveness, and a lot of other things. So as we tried to get at that, we also, in my last job, tried to get at some economic development. You may ask, why is a four-star Marine general at the time interested in economic development in 3 countries in the Northern Tier? And the answer is because that's the solution to a lot of things that plague them, that then cause them to leave their country, move north, read illegal migration, and then again back to the drug issues. Wasn't effective in working that within the interagency because I was only a 4-star general. Now I'm a Secretary of Homeland Security and partnering with people like Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State, and many others within the interagency, we can, I think, get at this issue of economic development. And as a direct result of that thinking and a direct result of President Trump telling me to fix the problems on the southwest border, we're having a major conference in Miami in mid-June. We've got a whole range of people coming. Our great friends, the Mexicans, are co-sponsoring with us. We have Canada, Panama, Costa Rica, Colombia, a great partner in the region, Colombia, as well as we think some European countries coming in, as well as the EU coming in for the first day of this being our Prosperity Day, to talk about business, to talk about investment, to talk about what those countries have to do to open their economies to more investment. The Vice President of the United States will be down there for the day at my request, at our request, I should say, and he will lend his support to that. I believe we have the Secretaries of Commerce and Treasury and others coming down for their views on what we can do to help. And of course, the countries in question, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, their presidents, all friends of mine, many in their governments, many friends of mine will be there. And Luis Moreno from that great organization, the Inter-American Development Bank, will be there to really lend their support in terms of that first day on prosperity. The second day, again, this is all in Miami. The second day will be security, read better police, better border protection, and an improvement in their police. There's corruption there, there's terrible intimidation. They're afraid for their families, they're afraid for their parents. These cartels, as you all know, as well as I do, are horrifically violent, and they hold neighborhoods, cities, in a grip of fear, and that includes police in many cases. So the point of all of this is to raise the awareness so that we can start to make a difference in Central America, because by making a difference there, drug demand reduction in the United States, improved police, improved courts, improved human rights, which are actually going, to say the least, going in a great direction since their troubled times of the 1980s. We can maybe make a difference there. And as I've told President Trump, sir, the protection or the securing of our southwest border, in my view, begins 1,500 miles south. We have unbelievably good partners in that part of the world. The Colombians are absolutely the best friends and allies we have in this regard in that part of the world. The Panamanians, the Costa Ricans, and all the way up. Great partners in this endeavor to stem the flow of illegal migration and drugs. So in my view, Mr. President, and he agrees, that it really begins down there. If we can improve the condition, the lot in life of Hondurans, Guatemalans, Central Americans, we can do an awful lot to protect the southwest border. Partnering with Mexico is critical. We do that. They're great friends. I count many of their senior ministers, friends of mine. We interact all the time. We have great cooperation. That's part of it as well. Securing our border, in some places with physical barrier, in other places with patrolling, technology, that will go a long way as well. And I'll just end with this, and we'll have a few minutes for a question or two. Because of what we've done in terms of implementing the law humanely, with dignity for those that we apprehend, but to execute the law, which is my responsibility. I don't make them, and I'm very quick to point out to members of Congress, if you don't like the law, immigration laws, then do your duty and change the law. I have no choice but to carry out the law. Now, I can't carry out all laws across the spectrum So we do have priorities within the execution of those laws. But if you don't like the law, change them. But because we have begun to execute the law and be public about it, we're not doing anything different than the Obama administration did, except we're executing or we're enforcing laws across the spectrum in terms of immigration. But because of that, and my appeals to the churches, to the evangelical movement, to the political leaders in Central America to ask their people to stay home, combined with this attempt to improve the economics of Central America, because of all that, illegal immigration from the Central America and our partnership with Mexico, the illegal movements of overwhelmingly decent people up a very, very dangerous network into the United States has dropped by 70%. That's 70% of people who are not abused by the traffickers, women, children, young boys. That's 70% of people who are not risking their lives to come up, and certainly 70% reduction in people who are not paying their life savings to come into the United States. And the message is, if you get here, and if you pay the traffickers, you will probably get here, but you'll be turned around within our laws relatively quickly and returned. It's not worth wasting your money. So if we can, if that message remains, which it will, and we help the economies, I think it's a win-win for both the region as well as for the United States. And with that, Jason, I will stop and take a couple of questions if you want. No claps, no. It takes too much time. Let's have a question. Yep. We have to sit down.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for those very informative, thoughtful remarks. Just a question for me, and I want to make sure we take a question from the audience as well. But you mentioned you mentioned the importance of that security begins 1,500 miles south of the border, and the importance of providing the right conditions in the countries of the Northern Triangle. For you, how do you see the balance and the need for improvement in the areas of economic development, rule of law, and security, all the three pillars that are so critical for really improving the conditions? How do you see kind of balancing those multiple interests to really improve conditions?
Well, you know, by any polling, the reason why the vast majority of the people of the region come to the United States is driven by economic opportunity or lack thereof. And as I say, I'm the first one to point out that the overwhelming number of people that come are good, decent people looking for a better way to make a living. The issue, though, is in many cases they're also, and this pains me to say this as an American, they're victimized when they get here by a system that doesn't pay them enough money, let me put it that way. They're victimized, they're overwhelmingly lower educated, unskilled workers. They come here primarily, as I believe, from the rural areas. They get to the United States. They are obviously illegal. They stay below. An awful lot of them, not a majority, by no means. These are good people as a group. But because of a lot of different reasons, the young men are oftentimes, in relatively large numbers, drawn into crime. Not all of them, but some of them. MS-13 is full of people that have come here from that part of the world and are criminals. An awful lot of the young women get taken into the other kinds of trades, sex trade, that kind of thing. Not all of them, but many of them. Those that don't go in those directions, don't get drafted into or recruited into that, are work under the table. And as I say, in many cases, we look at when we do take them in, they're working for slave labor type, whether it's on an agricultural farm or cleaning pots and pans, and probably the restaurant in Washington, D.C. They work for slave laborers, slave wages, under the table. They're victimized. So if we can give them a reason to stay home, and you talk to the religious leaders down there, you talk to the political leaders, they don't want to come here. They have to, in their view, they have to come here. Their families are in Central America. Their communities are in Central America. That's where they go to church. That's where their friends are. They come here for economic opportunity. If we can change that equation and give them a reason to stay home, where they can have, and we're not talking about high-tech jobs here, right? We're talking about agricultural jobs. We're talking about unskilled labor-type jobs, investment, garment industry as an example, those kind of, what do they call it, high labor, labor intensity jobs. Those are the kind of jobs. I was talking to a great guy, a good friend, President Hernandez from Honduras. He was in my office a few weeks ago, going down to see him in a month or a couple of weeks. He told me that he's reduced the amount of violence in his country by 1/3 in 4 years. That's a remarkable thing. That's a kind of a Colombia-level success story relative to their troubled times before the beginning of Plan Colombia. So he's reduced violence by 1/3, and he expects to add 600,000 jobs to his economy, and that's without this boost that we hope will come as a result of our efforts in Miami and beyond. So it's the economics that we have to improve, and I believe we can help. And we're not talking huge money. We're talking about maybe what it costs to run military operations for a day in Iraq.
Okay. The Secretary has a hard stop, so I want to just make sure that we take, if there's one question. One quick question from the
First hand up.
From the audience. Multiple hands up. I think I saw your hand first. Yeah. There's a microphone coming over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ted Hessen with Politico. I don't know if you're aware, but yesterday Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania was outraged at the fact that a young woman had been deported to Honduras along with her 5-year-old son. And he said he reached out to you and he tried to stop the deportation, but you didn't respond and DHS didn't act. I'm wondering, could you speak to that, and perhaps do you think she's in danger now?
Let me say that I have called, I've returned those calls, I think 5 times to date, and have yet to get a call back from Senator Casey or his staff. Let me also say that in every report you read, there's a lot more to the story than what you read. You have to understand that ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, to Homeland Security, John Kelly, we don't deport people. The law deports people. The law as passed, the laws as passed by the United States Congress. I say it over and over again. If the laws are not good laws, then change them. Don't call me or Twitter or tweet or go to the press with outrageous stories about how we do business or why we're deporting someone. In the case of this woman and her child, they were apprehended nearly 2 years ago on the border by customs individuals. And by law, they have to be taken in and put in a system. And by law, they have to ask why they're here. And when they said we're in fear, now remember, the vast majority of the people who come up here, in fact, I'd say the overwhelming number say exactly the same words because they are schooled by the traffickers to say certain words, to give certain scenarios, which generally speaking will get you to remain in the United States in the system because of a credible fear claim. So she did that. And for the better part, well over a year, under the Obama administration, remember, this is not a new idea for Kelly, it's not a new idea for Trump. This is the legal justice system that was passed by the United States Congress. So for well over a year, she went through with her son, a step-by-step process. I think she went legal justice system process, courts, all the way to Supreme Court that refused to hear the case because there's solid law about how to deal with people that come here illegally, or not in this case, claim asylum or claim credible fear. And over the period of almost 2 years, I think there were 5 or 6 denials, not by ICE, not by DHS, not by Kelly, but by the court system that ultimately led to her deportation yesterday. So had he talked to me, that's what I would have said to him. He did talk to the head of ICE, which according to the press he also refused to call him, but he did talk to ICE yesterday, and Tom Homan, an honorable, decent guy that heads up thousands of honorable, decent people that are in the business of immigration, told him what I just told you. We can't, there was a removal order by a judge. We can't ignore that. So when the removal order is final, which it was yesterday, or it actually was in April and it just caught up, then we had to go take that individual, in this case a mother and a child, and take them back, put them on an airplane safely back to their country of origin. Why does it take so long? Because when they come in and say the words credible fear and give a few examples of why they have credible fear, then the system takes over and puts them through a series of judges and some people in my organization at the initial levels. And I think 6 times they were denied their request to stay in the United States. Ultimately, the final denial was in April. We have no choice. Well, the choice would be to ignore a court order. So you can't pick and choose the laws that you obey, and I can't pick and choose the laws that we're, by law, required to enforce. And as I say, I've attempted to talk to Senator Casey. I mean, he's a busy guy too. He couldn't get me yesterday, but he did talk to the real person he needed to talk to, Tom Homeland, who's ICE. I'll try for the rest of the day and maybe for the rest of my life to talk to him. But I will give him the same message that Tom Homeland gave him. This person exhausted all of the legal protections, the process that the United States laws, as passed by the United States Congress, gave her. And we had a court order to remove her, and we did. We can't disobey the law. And with that, I got to run.
Thank you. Secretary Heller, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Being here. Thank you for your leadership. See you in Miami. Thank you. As we reset the stage, I ask you to take 2 minutes and watch a video that we put together around the report as they bring up more chairs.
The Northern Triangle is often looked at as a region of hopelessness and despair, but on the contrary, there is an incredible opportunity in the region if the right policies are put in place.
As Central Americans, we want to live in our countries. We don't want to leave. And that is why we have to have a true commitment to the region to make it possible to grow and to develop.
This is a problem that needs to be dealt with, not only for the stability of the Northern Triangle, but for the interests of the United States.
I believe the security area in the United States and the prosperity need in the Northern Triangle have come together.
This is a task force composed of business leaders, civil society leaders, policy leaders from the 3 countries. So this is not a Washington-driven effort.
If we were to not react, it would be like getting off the horse in midstream.
one ask I have for all of you is to help to make that video go viral. I know that it's tough to do that sometimes without a cat in the video, and we had thought about putting a cat in there for that specific reason, but at least we could try to make it go viral even without the cat. I'm particularly grateful to the people on the stage today with me. John will be on his way up, who flew in for the launch of our task force from Costa Rica, from El Salvador, from Guatemala. And in the case of Ambassador Negroponte, he just came back from Canada, so technically he did fly in for the launch of this report as well. But in all seriousness, President Chinchilla, Eduardo, Mayu, I am deeply grateful for all the work you have done with us over the course of the past year, and John as well. None of them need introduction, but I will do so anyways. President Laura Chinchilla served as President of the Republic of Costa Rica from 2010 to 2014 and is the country's first female president. Since leaving office, she has led several judicial and electoral missions for USAID, the UN Development Program, and the Inter-American Development Bank, and has also served, I'll add this to your resume, President Chinchilla, as an integral member of this task force. To her left is Maria Eugenia Brusuela de Avila, or Mayu, as we call her. Mayu was the first female foreign minister of first female minister of foreign affairs for El Salvador from 1999 to 2004. Upon leaving office, she then became president of Banco Salvadoreño, becoming the first woman to lead a private bank in El Salvador, and then went on to pioneer corporate sustainability at HSBC for Latin America. And Mayu is the Salvadoran co-chair of this task force. And Ambassador John Negroponte. Ambassador Negroponte has held numerous senior-level U.S. government positions, including Deputy Secretary of State, Director of National Intelligence, the nation's first, and also ambassador to a number of countries, including Honduras, Mexico, the Philippines, the United Nations, and Iraq. He is currently the vice chairman at McClarty Associates, and he joins Mayu, Eduardo, as the three of our four co-chairs for the report. Now, before diving into our discussion, I'd like to take a moment to also thank our many task force members. Most of them are back in their home countries and watching via video, but luckily some of them are here today. And I just want to take a moment to ask the members of the task force who are here today to please stand so we can thank you for your work. I think there was another task force member out there. Please join me in just giving a round of applause to everybody who has worked on this. As well as a big thank you to my many colleagues who have worked and helped to manage this task force over the course of the last year. Juan Felipe Celia, Maria Fernanda Perez, who is today with us, and Catherine Pereira, who stepped in to help bring this over the finish line. And most importantly, I also like to thank the Seattle International Foundation and the Inter-American Development Bank for their support of this effort. So we'll start this conversation by setting the scene before going into some of our recommendations and then the outlook looking forward. So just setting the scene, the current foreign policy landscape is, as we all know, awash with competing priorities. Among them, war in Syria, ISIS, North Korea's nuclear threat. And with all these issues in play, what are your reasons for why Congress and the administration should see the Northern Triangle as among one of the what I think should be one of the top foreign policy priorities? And in other words, why should the U.S. care about the region beyond what happens at the southwest border? Secretary Kelly mentioned this a little bit in his introduction, but perhaps President Chinchilla, I can start with you on the importance of Central America for U.S. interests.
Of course. Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody for being here. Well, I will start saying that we are too close to the United States, so it is impossible just to ignore the region. But also I will say that there are two other main reasons beyond our geographical position. One has to do with the recognition that Secretary Kelly just made, and that is that the United States has a very important moral obligation towards our countries from the point of view of the issue that has to do with illegal drugs. Most of the problems, and we will be analyzing that issue along this conversation, most of the problems we have today are explained by the amazing amount of illegal drugs that comes to the United States. And so there is a demand problem here in the United States, and that is very close link to the violence that experience in our region. And the second issue has to do with very practical considerations. And if we do not do something different in Central America in the following years, the violence will continue increasing. The illegal groups will continue working, and that means a very important threat to the United States home security. I will just finish quoting some words that were part of a statement of Admiral Kurt Tidd, the current command of the United States Southern Command. And he said in Congress the following: although each of these activities, he's speaking about the criminal activities in Central America, although each of these activities undermines regional security, the most dangerous scenario is that terrorist organizations will exploit criminal capabilities or human smuggling routes to enter the United States. Violent extremist organizations like ISIS seek to radicalize and recruit vulnerable populations in the Caribbean and parts of Central American nations.
And on that, I'd like to just also point out that we've never seen a terrorist actually come across the southwest border. John, what do you see as why this is so?
You're not sure.
You don't know.
You
Right.
don't know.
But I don't think I'd put the terrorist argument in the forefront.
No.
There are many reasons to be concerned about Central America and the Northern Triangle countries in particular. And I think geography does play a very important role in the sense that these countries are so close to us. And there's a big difference strategically when you're talking about Central America on the one hand, and you're talking about a country that might be 10 or 12,000 miles away from the United States on the other, because the migratory patterns and the activities have a direct bearing on our country, as we see from the growth of these populations. In our country who have migrated. When I was ambassador to Honduras in 1981, there were about 50,000 people of Honduran origin living in the United States, and mostly concentrated around New Orleans, where the banana trade used to be and still is in some measure. And today, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Hondurans there are in the United States, maybe a million, it could be more. And so I think the problem has reached enormous scope and levels, and I'm glad to see attention being given to the root causes, if you will, of some of these problems. I think the money that the Congress voted the last time around for the Northern Triangle and what we seem to be able to hope will be done again, I think is very positive. I think the initiative to interest the business community in that part of the world, after all, the Northern Triangle forms a part of North America. I think the ideal vision for this part of the world would be to have sort of a North American economic platform that could compete with the rest of the world. And why shouldn't Central America be part of that? Mm-hmm. Some parts of it are already starting to be, like Panama, Costa Rica, and so forth. Well, why can't the other countries do that as well, and Mexico also? So I'm hopeful. I'm encouraged by the level of interest that's being given
to Central America. I think linking it to our own national security from the point of view of the migration of criminal elements and so forth is fine. But I think basically what we want to do is help resolve the root causes in that part of the world, and I think then integrate it better economically with ourselves and other parts of North America.
And those root causes has been the focus of this task force over the course of the last year as we go into the recommendation. But before doing so, John mentioned the support for the region, and just to point out that the Senate today will be voting on an omnibus spending bill that passed in the House that includes $655 million for Central America, which in the current budgetary environment that we're in, I think is a fantastic accomplishment for the region to have that kind of money in the omnibus spending bill that's being voted on today in the Senate. Eduardo, Mayu, I'd like to ask each of you what you see as some of the biggest successes and challenges of current policy in your respective countries. Maybe Maya, we can start off with your take on El Salvador, and then Eduardo on Guatemala.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for having this interest in the Northern Triangle. Definitely for me, what you have stated in regards to the challenges that we have are met also with successes. And one of the strongest successes that I see within El Salvador is our democracy. We do have a democracy. We have come out of a terrible civil war within our own borders. And now we have a ruling party that comes from the FMLN, former guerrilla fighters, which just goes to prove how we have consolidated in a peaceful transition of government from what used to be also Arena governing the country. So that what gives you is that we have a framework, but it's still a weak democracy. So the challenge is how do we strengthen that? And unfortunately, one of the aspects that was not mentioned before in the answers by my colleagues, and I agree with everything you've said before, is corruption. Because there is so much money floating because of the trafficking, drug trafficking, that we need then to strengthen our own institutions. And in this regard, we believe that that challenge of consolidating institutions, but also at the same time generating the opportunities, especially the economic opportunities that will keep our people in our countries. So those are the things that as task force we have confronted in our report in the Atlantic Council, in which we do hope that they will complement all of the efforts that are being made, not only by the US, but also by other friend countries of the region and the countries themselves. Thank you.
Eduardo.
Well, I must start by thanking the Atlantic Council in putting together this effort because of the conception and the methodology. That is part of what we have been striving for many years. And I think that Secretary Kelly put it in a very correct outlook and optic. And I see many faces, friendly faces here who have been for years striving for this integral vision. The report, if you dare to read it, will strike you as having a co-responsibility view. It's not that just the three Northern Triangle countries are a problem for the United States. It's that the United States, Mexico, and Central America share common problems and responsibilities. This leads me to the general area of law enforcement and the reform of justice. In the case of Guatemala, many of you know this very well, there has been an effort which was unheard of just a few years ago in asking for the help of the United Nations to set up an international commission against impunity. When I served as vice president of my country, we realized that the justice system in itself was reluctant to transform and modify itself. it was like, sorry for the comparison, tying a dog with a string of sausages. They would not lend themselves to the reform that was needed. So we asked for outside help. We thought, as a UN member, we were entitled to this type of help. Within the UN, though, there was resistance. Some of the members of the Security Council decided that that was their own turf to guarantee countries that had been hit by wars or internal wars or like ours, that this was a Security Council affair. And we didn't agree with this. We were convinced that an outside mechanism of sorts that could strengthen our justice system from without the country, with the neutrality needed, with no political commitments within the country, could do this type of service. And it's working. And it's working well in spite of many criticisms. This has led to most of our successes in the strive for a reform of the justice system. There are more than 100 public officials, former public officials in jail awaiting for trial because this commission has helped the General Attorney's Office to create solid cases of corruptive activities that stemmed all the way up to the president and the vice president, who are as well in jail. The challenges, ay Dios mío, there are quite a few, but if I may bring to the discussion some of the opinions that we gathered yesterday from some US senators of both parties. They have the same worries that we do, that the money is well oriented and well spent, that there are accountability mechanisms and transparency mechanisms that respond not only to the donors, but to the people of our countries. And that, of course, we can count on technical help to strengthen our own public institutions where they are needed the most. Within this perspective, I would say that part of what we are still hoping for is, and I'm sorry to say it publicly, a better understanding amongst the three governments and the rest of the region.
Thanks, Eduardo. And I think some of Eduardo's comments about CSIG, about accountability, transparency, these are all reflected in the recommendations of this task force. And I think that the recommendations that we have are not just for the U.S., but they're for the countries themselves. And they're looking at how to improve the prosperity from the region, very much from a shared responsibility standpoint. I think before digging into the recommendations, let me just give an overview of some of the findings. And I think just to put this in context a little bit, we as I mentioned, we did a poll conducted by Gallup before we even started the work of the task force, recognizing that a bunch of elites coming together to make policies for countries doesn't really work anymore, and that you need to get the voice of the people. And so our work was the premise of our work was based on the concerns that we heard from the people in our poll. And what we heard, not surprisingly, was high levels of distrust in virtually all institutions, citizens without much hope, and a general desire to welcome any potential solution. We mentioned corruption before, and we found that 9 in 10 residents of the three countries see corruption as widespread. Now, we do see a lot of positive momentum in the Northern Triangle, with local leaders stepping up to enact changes in the judiciary and the police, and investing much of their own money in solutions. 80% of the funding for the Alliance for Prosperity comes from the countries themselves. But as I said, this is very much a region at a crossroads, and this is why sustained long-term U.S. investment is so critical. And what we did as part of the task force, and And Eduardo dared everybody to read the full report. I dare you as well to read the full report. But if you don't want to read the full report, online is a variety of resources, including stack cards that give you an overview of it, videos, and other types of resources that make it not as necessary to read the full 40 pages. But our recommendations go into 3 different categories: sustainable economic development, rule of law, and security. And things like on the economic front, focusing U.S. assistance on intermediary cities that can actually create jobs, as well as migrant sending communities, as well as urging the Northern Triangle governments to create a trinational institution in charge of coordination among all border actors. The fact that commerce is so imperative among the different countries. Things like on rule of law, offering increased U.S. Technical assistance to banking regulatory agencies to comply with international anti-money laundering standards, or for the countries themselves to reach agreements so international advisors can come in and help to clear the backlog of cases facing the judiciaries. Or things like on security, ramping up the number of advisors to local police forces, as well as encouraging the hiring of more women to join the force and supporting prison reform, as well as countries targeting high-risk areas for social and educational support. And that's just a very broad-brushed overview of our findings. But I think, Mayu, after about a year of discussing the different issues affecting the countries of the Northern Triangle, one of the main takeaways of our report is the importance of promoting better infrastructure and deeper integration, really finding what are the key lever points for promoting economic investment. And the task force suggests building on the existing infrastructure fund supported by the IDB and promoting public-private partnerships. So if you could just take a moment and expand on the policy recommendations the task force recommends in those key areas for economic development.
Well, thank you, Jason, very much. What is very close to my heart, because I also believe, as General Kelly and Secretary Kelly was stating, it is the lack of opportunity, especially economic opportunities, that we have to develop in our region. And thus, if you have the time, and I do hope you find the time to read in our report, when we strive to give recommendations on the building of sustainable economic development, we touch upon 3 very important ones, which is the infrastructure, the key sector development, and the human capital. And let me start out with a small anecdote. When I was supporting my government as foreign minister, we used to go to the people and travel the country. And we would go to places where it would take us hours just to get there, to the small village or the very small city. And we would ask the people, what is it that you need? I would think that they would respond, oh, I need a school, I need a hospital, all of them, without exception, always said, I need a road. Why? Because of that infrastructure, that he could or she could go and get her children to school or get his mother to the hospital. And there was another one that went a bit further and said, have you seen who is the person who has the nicest house here in the village? And I said, yeah, well, it looks like that one over there. He says, you know what he does? He sells tiles. Because of the very bad road, no one could go out and buy the cheaper tiles because they would be broke by the time that they got to their homes because of the very bad roads. So infrastructure for us is not simply a matter of having a good road. It's really fostering that job creation and fostering the possibility of people finding that development. And again, we have people here from the IDB, and we're very, very grateful, and also through U.S. commitment, that this infrastructure fund, which is being coordinated by the IDB, finds the possibility also of investment through public-private enterprise. For us, this is very important. We need to step up quickly, and many times governments don't have the full capacity or the knowledge to do so. So bringing in alliances which bring in the best road constructors or infrastructure developers within frameworks that work. In my country, we already have what we call una asociación público-privada, APP, but unfortunately, not a single association has been done because of the very bad quality with which the law was written and has not been able to be enacted. So what we're striving for and recommend in the report also is to find, and bring about that capacity in which we are able then to have the framework that will give the security to investors to come in with public-private associations. And last, if I may, Jason, in regards to this, is that we're also wanting to remove, in regards to infrastructure, not only it's the roads, many times it's the customs that present obstacles. So we're striving to that all the countries come in together to form a trinational institution headed hopefully by their vice presidents so that they can coordinate and better coordinate all of the agents that are responsible for those customs and borders control. And in that way, even though we're speeding up the roads with better roads, we won't hit a blockage when we get to the different territorial boundaries. So it is, for us, important that there is collaboration amongst all of the different actors, and that is one of the solutions that we find within our report. And may I end simply stating and again reiterating how important that would be to bring in more investment, also not only from the foreign investors, but also from the local investors who are willing to do so if there is not only this better framework in regards to infrastructure, but also in regards to the legality, which would then immediately increase our competitiveness.
Now, President Chinchilla, you are widely recognized as a regional security expert, and one of the 3 pillars of our findings is on security. We recommend a number of things like targeting policies targeting high-risk neighborhoods. I mentioned before, increase the number of women in police forces. How can the recommendations that we have out there, in particular, make the difference over maybe the standard, a typical strategy of mano dura, an iron fist strategy? What is some of our recommendations go in a different direction on security, and why do you see that is so necessary?
Well, of course, because what we try to do is to have a kind of integrated approach to the issue that has to do with the criminal justice challenges that we have there, recognizing that if we have violence, if we have crime in such amount in those countries, it is because there are some underlying causes that are creating these kind of scenarios. And that means that, of course, we are not only talking about the importance of economic development, we are also emphasizing the issues that has to do with social development and inclusion, but from the point of view of controlling, preventing, and combating the criminal activities. We also recognize that it is necessary, according to the rule of law, to invest even more in the justice system, in the police forces, in all the different components of the criminal justice system. And I want to emphasize that also we recognize that many good things have happened up to now. If we compare the police forces now, the security forces now in Central America, with the security forces we had 30, 20 years ago, we have to recognize that they are more professional. They are more respectful in terms of human rights. They have more equipment. We have more security forces patrolling the streets and preventing crime. And also, they have more effective coordination mechanisms. And the same is happening with the justice system. And also, we have to admit that if we have been able to tackle corruption, as Eduardo said, in Honduras, in Guatemala, and also as we have seen in Salvador and Honduras, is because we already have independent prosecutor prosecutors doing the job. So I think that we decided to come with a very integral approach, recognizing where we are now and try to identify those specific actions that, in our view, could expedite the reform process that we should continue supporting in the region. My final words has to do with and that is something we didn't decide to put in the report, but it was a discussion underlying also the different activities we have, and that has to do with the importance of trying to have a more homogeneous approach to the drug issue. We have to recognize that now there are many dissonances in implementing the different policies. Here within the United States, you are having the legalization alternative at the state level, at the federal level. They have a different approach. And in Central America, we also have a very intense debate about how to align the different policies. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to be consistent with the policies we are going to implement there.
Now, John, one of the main pillars under our economic development is the importance of human capital and human capital development. I know an issue that's very near and dear to you. If you could take a moment to expand on some of the ideas, the importance of our recommendations on scholarships, insertion into the labor force, some of the importance of human capital in our ideas and how that relates to our broader goal of achieving greater opportunities for prosperity.
Right. So, I mean, as one deals with some of the structural problems and the financial ones and the commercial and so forth, one mustn't overlook the underlying issue of human capital. And I was reminded when we worked on the task force of what had happened in the 1980s when President Reagan asked Dr. Kissinger to chair a commission on what to do about Central America. And one of the outcomes, interesting outcomes of that Kissinger Commission report was to establish several thousand scholarships, I believe, a year for a certain period of time for deserving Central American students. I think we need to revisit that whole idea, and that's one of the things that the report recommends, to look at the issue of scholarships again as a way of promoting the economic betterment of Central America, for one thing, and also as a way of promoting better understanding between us on the other hand. And when you think about it, you could probably count the number of Central American students in the United States in the hundreds or perhaps the low thousands. I'm not entirely certain. But you know, there are 300,000 Chinese university students who come to the United States every year to pursue scholarship. Now, obviously, it's a much larger country, but for countries so close to the United States, it would seem to me that the whole issue of our academic and student relationships and this whole question of scholarships, since after all studying in our country can be quite expensive, ought to be looked at, and I think it'd be an area that would pay good dividends. And last point I'd make in that regard, in the Reagan administration, the aid administrator at that time was Peter McPherson, who himself is an educator. And I asked him after he spent 5 or 6 years running AID, I said, well, what did you think were the most effective programs? You've been spending a lot of money in these different areas. And he said, if I had it to design myself, and it was entirely up to me, I would concentrate almost all of our economic assistance on scholarships. Now, that was, of course, only one person's point of view, but I thought it sent a kind of an interesting measure of what one experienced aid official had seen work well during his tenure as director of AID.
And one of our meetings, John reminded us of the Kissinger Commission, and you can it's available online. We went ahead and looked at it, and the team went ahead and read through it. But some recommendations, as John says, that really still ring true today. Eduardo, we've seen great advances in another area the task force tackled, which is rule of law. In recent years, you mentioned CSIG before, but there are still key issues such as high impunity rates and also corruption in the election of public officials that remain. And the task force has some suggestions there, suggestions like reforming how secondary public officials are elected, and also things like getting help from U.S. And international advisors to increase prosecutorial capacity to clear some of the backlog of cases. Now, political tensions make many of these reforms tough to enact, but what are your thoughts on what could be a path forward for enacting some of these reforms and some of the others in our task force that are, I think, critical to boosting rule of law? And I think also just to mention before you say that, it's not just in Guatemala have we seen CSIG, but we see Maxi in Honduras. In El Salvador, we see an attorney general who is fighting every day, Douglas Menendez, for increasing transparency across the country. So, but Eduardo, if you could expand a little bit on some of our suggestions on rule of law.
Well, to start with, an appreciation of the size of some of the problems. In Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, there is a backlog of almost 3 million cases in the justice system that have not been brought to trial. And however, most of the accused are in preventive custody in jail. And it's a sort of a master's degree in crime, because our jails in general in the 3 countries need also structural reform. But it's only one of the legs of a multi-legged table of efforts. In this perspective, we find that the way in which mid-level officers, mostly of the justice system, prosecutorial system, and accusatory system, need to be under a different type of oversight and scrutiny. And this is one of the areas of reform that each country is pushing forward. Maybe Guatemala is in the last place of a tail of this effort because of the way in which our justice system is designed. Thirdly, Guatemala has debt to over half of its population, which is indigenous of Mayan origin, of 22 different languages. And once the peace accords were signed 20 years ago, one of the efforts that was underscored was precisely how to transform the different services of the state so that the indigenous populations would be better served. 10 of the most unequal countries in the world are in Latin America, and Guatemala is the most unequal of it all, mostly because of these historical exclusion over centuries of the indigenous populations. But having said that, another area of concern that is important is the type of authorities within the justice system that oversee the career of judges and prosecutors. Salvador and Honduras have already enacted reform in this direction. Guatemala still lags behind. The Supreme Court not only acts as the topmost authority in judging, but also oversees the careers of judges. And they very seldom act on judges that misbehave, because when they finish their post as magistrates, they go back to being a judge. And so we have a saying in Spanish, entre bomberos no se machucan las mangueras, which means they will not discipline the other judges. So these oversight mechanisms are still in need of strengthening and accountability in terms of the society. And one last comment that I think is in order is that the report, and it's an easy read, has the virtue of identifying a need and then in a very succinct way propose the possible courses of action, which in a way some are joint, but in another way some are the responsibility of our own societies, not just the governments, but societies in general. And one thing that the senators yesterday stressed on, I already mentioned this, but I want to reiterate, is how do we improve these oversight mechanisms, not only in the justice system, but also in the investment system, in the public funding system. We have had, as a country, a formidable experience in just recent months of a health minister who has had the will and the valor, and another word that I will omit, to face up to the three strongest challenges that we've faced throughout Latin American countries in years in the health systems. The medicine providers, Congress, and the sindicatos, the unions within the, there are 73 unions within our health mechanisms. And she has had, as I said, the will and the valor to face up to these formidable adversaries. And the only way in which this was possible was with the support of the population. Organized sectors of society came out in favor of the minister vis-a-vis Congress, vis-a-vis the unions, vis-a-vis the medical providers, medicine providers.
Now, and Eduardo mentioned indigenous, especially in the case of Guatemala, and one of the things we did in the task force, and thanks to Eduardo, is we have one of Guatemala's foremost indigenous experts who participated in the task force, recognizing the fact that oftentimes indigenous issues are not paid adequate attention. Now, we haven't yet talked about kind of what's happening in Congress. I want to also mention the work that the Inter-American Development Bank has played in really kind of helping to not only the plan of the Alliance for Prosperity, but its leadership on bringing the countries together for a strategy for the region. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we take questions from everybody who's here today. So if you have a question, and I promise I have plenty more myself, but I want to open up to all of you. So if you have a question, please raise your hands and microphones will come over to you. I see John Maisto first. Yes, in the third row.
No, it's not John Mason.
No. Mark
Schneider.
Schneider.
Mark Schneider. I'm sorry, Mark.
It's okay. Mark Schneider. Currently with CSIS, but been around Central America for a while. I think it's an excellent report, and I think the recommendations make a lot of sense. I had two questions. One is, I assume that you're going to do the same thing in each of the countries in Spanish to communicate those same recommendations. And the second is, I would hope that you would figure out a mechanism with the countries to essentially every so often follow up on what's happened in terms of the implementation of the recommendations. And then that's on process. On two substantive areas, the report, I think, makes a very important emphasis on in the human capital section as well on breaking the breaking the chain. So doing something to change the conditions in the countries when the kids or others are deported, so that they don't go back into the barrios and become victims or members of the maras. as an example. And it's not clear to me that that some of the current pilot programs are very good, but they're very limited. In Chakra, in Salvador, the Guatemala programs, they're very limited. And my question is twofold. One, was it your findings that the U.S. government is providing sufficient information about each individual who's deported in terms of their background so that the government, together with the U.S. and others, could plan a program for that individual to keep them from going right back into the same problem from which they fled in the first place? That's one. And the second is what you have the last paragraph in your executive summary, which is a multi-year authorization to continue the support. As you know, I was heavily involved in the post-conflict reconstruction efforts. And the fact is we walked away from those far too early in terms of helping the countries institutionalize the transformation that was necessary. And I'd be very interested in whether you think you're getting support from the Congress and from this administration, given the proposals to cut by 30% USAID in state, on this particular issue. Multi-year authorization, continued level of support for these kinds of recommendations.
Great questions, Mark. And actually, I teach at GW and have assigned some of Mark's reports on Central America to my class. I think just first on follow-up on the process. In country, yes, we'll be launching this in El Salvador in June. We will have a Spanish version of the report, not ready for today, but for the launch in El Salvador. That's what the funding permits at this point. If we can find additional funding for Guatemala and Honduras, we would love to launch them in those countries as well. We've also had some discussions about follow-up for the recommendations and some type of continuous assessment, and we're looking for the potential means to be able to do that. And as you mentioned, that last paragraph, the authorization paragraph, this is a important focus of this task force, that we see the money that's been spent thus far in Congress as hopefully year one or year two of kind of a Plan Colombia, but for Central America. And I'll turn over to my colleagues to answer your questions about breaking the chain and deportees. Vimayo?
If I may, thank you so very much for your comments and agree with them in regards, breaking the chain, especially by generating opportunities. One of the things in the report that got me completely thrilled was the involvement of the private sector. This cannot be a response only of the U.S. government and the local governments. It is impossible. It is private sector that generates the jobs and the opportunities, but we have to work together. So Bienvenido a Casa has been a very successful program we have in El Salvador, by which we received the immigrants and deportees that I brought back. But many of them, as you said, they just go into a turnstile door and jump back again with a coyote to come back to the States because of the lack of opportunities. So it is there. We do hope that the pilot programs are being successful, but especially through the support also from the private sector, that we are able to generate an expansion of these type of programs. And but the most important, I think, that the report hints to is that governments, the three governments, have to work together so as to generate the comfort and the legal security for investors, because it is only with their support that we will be able to really break that chain in regards to having that. And I just also wanted to say, in regards to the continued level of support for the recommendations, that I do have hope that the governments, also the local governments, will find in them a renewed responses to the problems and the possibility of them being confronted positively.
John, additional comments?
Well, just on Congress, I mean, and on multi-year, I think that I'm encouraged by the level of interest that we seem to have already gained in the report, and the fact that we were able to meet with the senators yesterday. And I also feel that we've got good support from the administration, both the State Department and Secretary Kelly. I think he's very much with us on this. So whether we're going to get a hard and fast commitment to multi-year commitments way out starting right now, I don't know, but I do sense that the political atmosphere is positive for that, even in the context of these proposed rather serious cuts, because as Jason, I think, mentioned earlier, close to $600 million
655
is in the actual budget, which will carry us until October 1st, and that compared to some of the drastic cuts that have been bruited about seems to be fairly positive. And I think it shows the priority that people attach to doing something that is so close to home.
And let me make sure we're almost out of time, so let me just make sure we get another question from the audience. I see your hands, sir, in the halfway back there, Nicolas. Can you just wait a second for the microphone, please?
Here you go. No, we can't.
Good morning. David Reed is my name. Congratulations to the Atlantic Council and to the members of the task force, not only for the excellent quality of the report, but the impeccable timing. Its release could not come at a better time, quite frankly. As Secretary Kelly has mentioned this morning, and as the report says clearly, the foundations of prosperity and stability in the region depend on economic growth. By the same token, economic growth in the region depends on sustainable management of the region's natural resources. I hardly need remind you that the civil wars that beset the region were fundamentally about control of land. Today, not only are many of the issues of land unresolved, but on top of which today we face the question of water and the increased impact of climate change in the region and the disruption, the weakening of rural livelihoods. And in fact, the conflicts over water are rising. I've briefly looked at the study and its recommendations. I'm sorry to say I don't find the issue of natural resources, which is really the foundation of corruption in many of these societies, adequately addressed, even in the questions of reinstating the rule of law and security.
Great,
I really very much appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you for your question. We were just talking about water the other day. Maybe Eduardo, would you like to?
Well, David, thank you very much for the comment and the worry. We found in the work of the report that the first audience that the report needed to address its text to was the Congress of the United States and many of the authorities here. And maybe that slant permeated over our work. Secondly, because the attention to environmental issues and problems, and mostly the degradation of environmental conditions in Central America, is shared by many countries. It's a global concern. But in some of the countries is a source of regional internal conflict already. That is mostly a domestic responsibility as it is seen by the authorities of each and every country, not an international responsibility, sad to say. Another element that I think is in order is the concept of conditionality. We don't think that the US Congress is going to consider a multi-year commitment unless there are some conditions to be met.
Some deals.
In the direction, the themes, and the quality of the spending, but also in the accountability and the correctness of the spending, as well as our internal preoccupation, and it surfaces in the text of the report. But you are absolutely right. This is something that is absent from the report.
On that note, I want to, in the interest of time, finish on time. And I'd like to, before doing so, also again recognize the many ambassadors from Central America who are here today. Ambassador Campbell of Nicaragua, Ambassador Canjura of El Salvador, Ambassador Vilma Guatemala, Ambassador Taborda Honduras, Ambassador Macaya of Costa Rica. Thank you very much for all being here. Thank you again to our many members of the task force who are here today. Again, my colleague Juan Felipe Celia, who worked tirelessly on this, and to our co-chairs present, Ambassador Negroponte, Eduardo Stein, Maya Brizuela, and President Chinchilla, one of our distinguished members of the task force. Thank you all again, and thank you for being here, and I encourage you to read the findings of this report.